Technology news website My Broadband is reporting that a hacking group is threatening to leak personal data of prominent political figures in South Africa. The group, said to be based in Brazil, claimed responsibility for the attack on TransUnion SA last week. For more on this, we're joined by My Broadband editor, Ian Vermeulen. Thank you so much, Ian, for making the time to speak to us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That article you wrote, it says you've been communicating with N40 sect TU via text. How did you authenticate whether it's really them?
So they are called Naughty Sec. They communicated with us, and they obviously detected our skepticism, and so they have been providing samples of the data that they've stolen to try and prove that it is indeed them. So they reached out to us and to another media outlet via email to begin with, and provided us with the location to contact them on Telegram and on a platform called Session. And so that's how we made contact with them, is they contacted us first and said, this is how you can reach us.
I didn't even know that you still have Telegram. What sort of information, or rather, what are they saying? What is their modus operandi?
So they said that they were looking around and they saw that in South Africa, Experian was recently hacked. And so they started looking at other credit bureaus, and they looked at TransUnion and started sniffing around, communicating with other members of the international hacking community who told them that, listen, hacking TransUnion is dead easy. And so when they probed the TransUnion network, these attackers said that they found that there was a user account on a file server, a TransUnion file server that had a very poor password. So in fact, the password was password. That gave them entry into the file server, and that allowed them to download over 4 terabytes of TransUnion's data. According to these attackers, that includes a Department of Home Affairs database of 54 million South Africans, so basically everyone with an ID number in South Africa, and the data from banking institutions, insurance companies, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of people who, and cellular providers as well. So the data of all kinds of companies that use TransUnion services.
The very data that they're now using to demand a ransom. Tell us about their threat to expose private information of particularly senior politicians and including their bank statements.
Yes, so this is their attempt to get attention on this, because TransUnion has refused to pay the extortion demand. They are demanding $15 million payable in cryptocurrency, Bitcoin or Ethereum, I believe. And with TransUnion refusing to pay the ransom or extortion demand, they are now trying to get attention on the case by threatening senior political leaders in South Africa. That includes President Cyril Ramaphosa, Julius Malema. They've also provided samples of data of the TransUnion CEO, Lee Naik, and of information regulator Panzi Tlakula. I've spoken to the information regulator, and she said that the data that these attackers provided, she doesn't recognize it. So make of that what you will. Perhaps the data they have is old or inaccurate, or perhaps they pulled the data of the wrong Panzi Tlakula.
Yeah, a bit of a double whammy for TransUnion, with on the one hand, the hackers demanding a ransom, and the threat from the information regulator that they could face up to a 10 million fine for this indiscretion.
Yes, so the information regulator let us know. We asked them directly what kind of penalties are there for data leaks like this. And they said if after an investigation it is found that TransUnion was negligent, then they could face a 10 million rand fine or even criminal prosecution. But that's only if the investigation finds that they were negligent in their handling of the data.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you, just in terms of us consumers, what's our recourse? And is the password the only entry point? What other gaps exist where we can tighten up our online presence?
Yeah, so South Africa's banks all have some kind of alternative or extra measure than a password, right? So you have your bank account number and your password, and then you must also do something else. Either log in via an app, you click authorize on an app, or type in a one-time PIN. And so those are a one-time PIN-based system, especially based on an app. The SMS-based one-time PIN systems are not particularly secure, but the app-based ones are good. And so those are steps that people can take to secure their online accounts. It's called two-factor authentication, and any service that supports it. So, for example, Facebook is on a big drive to have everybody enable two-factor authentication on the platform. So that's one that people can use. Google has two-factor authentication. And so that is a strong recommendation from within the security community for people to adopt two-factor authentication wherever it's available. That's one step. The recourse for consumers, unfortunately, must come from the information regulator. The information regulator must hold institutions to account that recklessly handle people's personal information. But the steps that consumers can take to protect themselves, ironically, is through things like credit bureaus, where you can subscribe to services that will let you know if someone tries to apply for credit in your name fraudulently, or not just fraudulently, but at any time, and then you can verify whether it's fraudulent. And so that's one thing that people can do. And then the other thing to do is just to be extremely cautious. And if somebody contacts you and they've got your ID number, don't assume that they're legitimate, because your ID number is basically available for anyone on the internet now. South Africans must assume that their ID number is public knowledge and must demand other ways for companies to authorize or authenticate that you are speaking to the real deal. If somebody calls you up and says, "Hi, I'm from your bank. This is your ID number. I need some other piece of information from you," then us as the consumer must go, "No, you need to prove further that you're a bank, that you're my bank and not a scammer. What else have you got?" For example, those are just some steps that consumers can take.
Despite all these measures and steps that you're talking about, we know that hackers are vigilant. They're constantly finding loopholes in different systems, corporate systems and government systems. Just also, one of the impacts of COVID-19 is that people more and more are going online. In the past, people could choose to have a bank app or to walk into a bank. But these days, you're literally forced to have an online presence. Just in terms of the future, what's government doing to ensure cybersecurity in South Africa?
Yes, that's a good and excellent question, because part of what needs to happen here is South Africa needs to step up its cyber enforcement. And so it doesn't help if criminals are just able to get away with whatever they want. That emboldens them and makes it so that they know that they can attack South African institutions without fear of justice. Whereas in the United States, for example, you have to think twice, because while the FBI is under-resourced, they play a long game, and even if they only nail you after 4 years, if your crime is big enough and it involves an American citizen, they will come after you. And so South Africa has a reputation of a country where the law enforcement just doesn't go after digital crimes, it's basically up to the institutions themselves to go after criminals and potentially prosecute them. That needs to change. And so we have the Cybercrimes Act that's in force now. We have the legislation available, but what needs to happen is our cybercrimes units at our police, at the Hawks, need to be resourced, and our prosecuting authority needs to be resourced with people who understand the space so that these criminals can be brought to justice. Otherwise, we're just going to be a soft target for the world's hackers.
Yeah, and finally, I just want to ask you, you're saying that TransUnion says they're not paying the ransom. What conversation did you have with, is it Naughty for Sec? Or Naughty Sec?
Yeah,
Naughty Sec.
Yes,
what conversation?
Yeah. The four is a A.
Yeah.
Yes.
What conversation did you have with them about the realness of their threat? How will they make good on their threat if they're not paid?
They've already started doing it. So they've already started releasing data on government employees. They've released samples of various financial institutions. And so they do seem serious about leaking this information. And honestly, it doesn't cost them anything. Part of the problem here is that TransUnion can pay and then they leak the data anyway, right? And so that's why usually in cybersecurity companies recommend against paying extortion demands because it just invites further extortion demands, and there's no guarantee that the attackers, the cyber criminals, will make good on their promise not to leak the data. They're in full control. They can leak it if they want to, even after you've paid. And so they have already started publishing information, but I should highlight here, the TransUnion has said that from its perspective, the attack was a limited amount of information. And what Naughty Sec have not yet conclusively proven is that the data that they have at their disposal was in fact obtained from a TransUnion system, and that it wasn't a separate leak or an attack on a different system, and that they are trying to humiliate and shame TransUnion for an ulterior motive. So I just want to make clear that we don't have all the facts yet, but the bottom line is what we do know is these attackers are serious. They do have a tremendous amount of data in their possession, which they've demonstrated to journalists and on a public Telegram channel by releasing samples from this data, and so regardless of anything else, the fact is they have this information, and they can use this information for all kinds of nefarious purposes. So it will be good for ordinary South African citizens to take necessary steps to make sure that they protect themselves.
We hope to have you back again one day to talk about the auctioning of spectrum, but thank you so much for making the time.
My pleasure. Have a great day further.
Vermeulen is the editor at My Broadband.